Nesaf, rhowch groeso mawr I aelod cynulliad Dwyrain Caerfyrddin a Dynefwr, Carmarthen East and Dynefwr Assembly Member, Adam Price.
Can I just start by saying what an honour it is to follow David Wigley. Thank you, David, for the encouragement, support and leadership you've given, not just to me, but the whole party. Really, thank you very much.
We're 19 months away from the beginning of a new decade. New decades are by definition a time of new departures. And this new decade will certainly be that, starting with the terra incognita of Brexit bequeathed as a legacy by the decision from a decade before. But new decades also bring with them the sense of new possibility, new potential, and new hope. This decade, more than most, contains within it the seeds of great transformation. It will be the age of automation, a second machine age, even perhaps an age of abundance to follow our own age of austerity. It will be a new electric age in the wake of peak oil. And for those of us old enough to remember getting keys to our own front door at 21, it will be the decade at the beginning of which our parliament, and it will be a parliament, will finally come of age. It's ends of decades, from the late 60s to the late 90s, that have been the hinge points of history, marking the dawning of a new age. Though sometimes that new age, as in 1979, is stillborn. For there's never any inevitability about the future. Whether it carries us on its crested waves to sunlit pastures or crashes our hopes against the storm gates of destiny depends on the choices we make in the final phase of each decade. For while we as Welsh nationalists cannot choose our geography or our history, the weather, alas, I mean this only in the symbolic sense, we can make and make our own. Now, the first point in moving forward is always looking back. I sound like a driving instructor, not a political leader, but in politics, as in the highway code, checking your mirrors is always a good way to start. It's those who went before us that will often show us the path ahead. So today, I give you Hywel Stanford Hughes, who almost 90 years ago hosted the first ever Urdd camp at his home here in Llangollen. The son of a Methodist minister, he left Wales in 1907 for Bogota, as you do, and soon displayed a considerable business acumen, acquiring 27,000 acres, which he developed for cattle rearing, expanding his interests into coffee, agricultural machinery, oil and cattle breeding, and soon establishing an office in New York. He was an enthusiastic, lifelong member and benefactor of this party, and was probably the only rancher ever inducted into the Gorsedd of Bards under the name Don Hywel. His entry in the National Biography of Wales ends with this wonderful encapsulation of his life. His aspirations may be summarized: to improve the standard of cattle breeding generally and to seek independence for Wales. Diolch, Don Hywel, for your aspiration, your inspiration, and your determination. The story of Hywel Stanford Hughes gives the lie to one of the most pernicious myths about the Welsh nation, that we somehow lack an entrepreneurial flair, that we are a passive nation congenitally condemned to poverty. So let us first restate something that should be obvious. There's nothing inevitable about Welsh poverty. It is man-made, and what is man-made can be undone. And let us tackle that other myth for Wales is not a poor nation. In per capita income, in current dollar terms, we're richer than every nation in Asia, bar two. Every nation in the Americas, bar two, and richer than more than half of Europe. Richer than the superpowers of Russia and China, and I should point out that we've beaten both at football. Richer than Slovenia, than South Korea and Spain. Richer than oil-rich Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and Bahrain in the Gulf, and the offshore havens of Bermuda and the Bahamas in the Caribbean. We are among the top 30 richest nations on the planet. As such, we would be automatically members of the world's club of high-income countries, the OECD, were we to be independent. We are a wealthy country whose people live in poverty. And therein lies the tragedy of modern Wales, from the kindling sparks of the Industrial Revolution that this country fired to the successful but suffering country that we still are today. So let us reflect on the 7 scourges of contemporary Wales. In health, we have, for example, the second lowest survival rate in lung cancer in Europe after Bulgaria. We have the lowest number of doctors per head of any country in the EU after that country, Poland and Romania. Of all the 4 nations in these islands, at 23%, we have the highest share living in poverty. That's over 700,000 of our people living in poverty, both absolute and relative, 185,000 of them children. With average house prices at almost 6 times the average Welsh wage, we have among the least affordable housing of any country in the world, and the slowest growing housing stock of any nation in the UK. In education, in the 2015 PISA tests, Wales, for the 4th time, ranked the lowest of all the UK nations. Of the 70 countries which took part, Wales ranked 36th for maths, 38th for reading, and 33rd for science. In other words, we're doing worse educationally than economically, which does not bode well, of course, for our collective future. On productivity, we have the lowest average GVA in the UK, and we have fallen further behind since the onset of devolution. Our infrastructure reflects our colonial past. No other modern developed nation lacks both decent rail and road links between the north and south of its country. And no other country and no other country that is itself an electricity net exporter lacks a national electricity grid to meet the demands of its own businesses. There are businesses the length and breadth of Wales now that cannot expand, that cannot create jobs, though the market is there for them, simply because there is not capacity in the electricity grid. And that sort of 19th century problem for a 21st century nation is reflected in exactly the same way in the scandalous situation with regard to broadband. If Cornwall can have 32% full fibre to the premises, then why is Wales languishing on a mere 4.6? And then we come to what some would say is the biggest scourge of all. The fact that 83% of our country's children leave secondary education without fluency in their own national language, and less than 2/3 of our nation's citizens currently identify themselves as Welsh at all. The paradox of Wales is that we're a rich country in both material and non-material terms, which has been condemned to poverty of circumstance and of ambition. A rich country that has learnt to be poor, with a legacy of sickness, underachievement, underinvestment, and a lack of self-confidence in our very existence as a nation. British rule in Wales has left deep scars. By and large, it's not been tyrannical, but it has been grossly negligent and left us without the necessary tools with which to achieve our potential as a nation. unless we free ourselves from the dead hand of London, then we will never get anywhere as a country and as a people. I was reminded of this slightly comically recently when I made a short walk from T. Howell to that neo-colonial outpost, the Wales office on Caspian Way, I think it's called. In that part of Cardiff, things tend to be named after references to children's literature, Roald Dahl, Plass, etc. In this case, it's C.S. Lewis and Narnia. And as I pressed the security intercom and a disembodied voice in clipped Anglophiliac tones intoned, "How can I help you?" I felt a little bit like the faun in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, about to be turned into stone. I was there to see the secret Brexit impact assessment, written by civil servants whose taxes we pay for, about the country in which we live. It's a document that I could read, but I couldn't take with me or show to the people that elected me, though I could write the whole thing out in longhand if I wanted to. Before I started, they got out a small lined metal container, which I thought initially was Alan Cairns' daybed, but was actually a safe deposit box for my mobile phone. For those few moments, I was in a parallel world, a spy from the future, an ambassador of a free Wales with special diplomatic immunity, visiting the Snow Queen's icy lair. I soon made my excuses and returned to my country through the nearest fur coat. If you suffer one of those moments of existential angst that Aneurin Bevan used to call the invasion of doubt, and ask yourself whether your place is in this party, then remind yourself one by one of each of those 7 scourges. The premature deaths, the lives blighted by poverty and poor skill, this dislocated nation that has all the potential but none of the levers to succeed. I don't think it will be long before that doubt is well and truly banished. Wales cannot afford our doubt. It desperately needs our determination. Now, nevertheless, we won't build up this nation through grieving for the things we lack. Self-pity is the world's worst motivator. We've comforted ourselves too long by blaming others for our misfortune. The answer is to take our future into our own hands. And that means taking it out of the hands of this Welsh Labour government, who can be best described, to use that colourful phrase of the great Irish firebrand P.S. O'Hegarty, as a collection of mediocrities in the grip of a machine, the most pathetic and ineffectual one-party state in the history of one-party states. Mediocrity for this Welsh Labour government is something to be aspired to, and they can't even manage that. Which is why our nation is crying out for change in 2021. We have to win, not for ourselves, not for our party, not for the ordinary stuff of political gain. We have to win for Wales, for democracy and for our future. Because if Labour wins again and rules unchallenged for 30 years, then everything we have won, everything we have fought for, and everything we cherish is at risk. The stakes really are that painfully high. So, I'm not tribal. We may make Lee Waters Minister for Robots, though we reserve the right to automate him if he begins to repeat himself, which may mean the quickest reshuffle in history. Our plan for Carwyn Jones is to get him to think more about the unemployed after the next election by making him one of them. But we won't create the Wales that we want by simply railing against the Wales that is. We need to paint a new Wales in the minds of our people with the most vivid brush strokes of our imagination, our imagined nation. We need to render a vision of what Wales by 2030 could be, a new, vibrant, confident, successful nation built on the foundations of 2 terms of a Plaid Cymru-led administration. What could we achieve over the course of that decade? What 10 leaps forward could we make by 2030? We will all have our own ideas as to what that progress could be, of course, and that's the conversation that we will want to have now with the Welsh people. But let me start by giving a flavour of what might be possible. In terms of our national infrastructure, we will want to build a Wales which will connect the north and south of our country with a new national railway line, and yes, a national expressway, a digital fibre spine, the very equal of Scandinavia and South Korea and even Cornwall. We will build a national energy grid with a national energy company connecting locally owned energy generating companies in every part of Wales. We'll create an international Wales, a Wales that is an associate member of UN bodies like UNESCO with its own para-diplomatic strategy, that in this week of the World Cup qualifiers, yes, has its own cricket team, and if the Faroe Islands succeeds in its application, its own Olympics team too. A Wales that will hold a World Expo for the first time in these islands since Dublin in 1907. A Wales that will build connection to the rest of the world, not just through its own airport, but through its own national air carrier, which will create direct flights to the Americas and mainland Europe, as well as to the rest of the UK and the rest of Wales through a network of regional airports. Where Theresa May wants to ban plastic by 2042 and diesel cars by 2040, which means no action for a generation, we could pledge to create a clean, green Wales by 2030, making Wales the pathfinder for ending the use of both, making our country the testbed of global innovation. By 2030, we could seek to make Wales the most attractive place to be young in Europe, apart from maybe Ibiza in August, by making university education free again for Welsh students, committed to studying at home, by building a free, universal and fully bilingual childcare service, and by introducing the world's first youth basic income, a guaranteed minimum income for all those in full-time work or education or wishing to start a business, and a guaranteed job for the young and underemployed. We could introduce our own national digital parallel currency alongside the pound, which would allow us creative ways of working around Westminster austerity and increasing local procurement and enhancing the circular economy. We'll create a national housing company to build new homes and new towns even across the nation to end homelessness completely by 2030. We will build up modern public transport systems everywhere in our nation, and step by step we'll make them free for all. We will make every school a bilingual school, so that by 2030, no child will leave our education system without knowledge of both our languages, and most children will leave with knowledge of 3 or more. We'll create a national care service funded by general taxation, delivered through local government, free at the point of use. And we'll end this decade of democracy in action by pledging to organise a national referendum on the constitutional future of our country that will ask this coming generation where they want their Wales to be mid-century, and will certainly include independence as a realistic option. And that is a referendum at that point in our history that we could win, because we will have demonstrated at last what self-government can do for the people of Wales. But first we have to win an election, and not one but two. And that will take discipline, it will take determination, it will mean putting aside petty differences and personal ambition to serve the common cause. 100 years ago, politicians in Ireland, in Australia and Canada built their independence from the once mighty British Empire, step by courageous step. They had the discipline and determination and selflessness of those that had experienced the tragedy of war. Thank God we have not had to experience that burden. But we need to mirror the depth of their character. This movement doesn't need a 1,000 would-be leaders. We have one. Get behind her. What we need is 10,000 citizens of a republic of the mind, of a Wales already free, that will march together as comrades in a great movement of ideas. Our enemies are poverty, ignorance, disease, cowardice, and selfishness. The enemy of those enemies are you, my friends and comrades, and our place is by each other's side. We march shoulder to shoulder, in lockstep together, or we do not march at all. We've many miles to cover, and we're surrounded on all sides by cynics and by the sounding brasses of the self-important and the self-indulgent. We have to ignore those voices if we're to find our own. The only self there is room for in this movement is self-government. Are you ready to add your voice to that greatest of all causes, to liberate this nation from poverty, from sickness, from ignorance and timidity? Are you with us? Are you with us? Yeah. Then let the work begin.